evening, and you will see a prompt. And we can go forward to the next slide. So tonight we have a couple different things going on to help those for whom English may not be their preferred language. First of all, we have ASL interpreters. If you'd, in order for you to be able to view the ASL interpreter at all times, we'd encourage you to keep your view settings in gallery mode. That should be the default setting, but you can change that by clicking the button that says gallery mode in the top right corner of your screen. It will show all the presenters together on the screen and ensure you can see the interpreter as well as the speaker. And tonight, I'd like to thank both Katie and Shannon, who are our ASL interpreters, and will be tag teaming to support us this evening. I will note that if the presenter is sharing slides, which as we are tonight, that view might change, and just know that we have pinned the interpreters and they should be moved to a small right corner in the top of your screen. We are also offering Spanish and Mandarin interpretation this evening. You should notice a globe at the bottom of your screen. You can please select English from the drop-down menu if you wish to remain in the English room. And the same applies to the other two languages. You'll be able to see the presentation, but you'll only hear the audio in the language that you have selected. And at this point in time, I'd welcome Miguel to offer that up in Spanish if you're here with us, Miguel.
Yes, I'm here. Good evening, everybody. My name is Miguel Moreno. I'm going to be the Spanish interpreter tonight. Hola, buenas tardes con todos. Mi nombre es Miguel Moreno y yo voy a ser el intérprete esta tarde. Ofrecemos servicio de interpretación para las personas que necesitan esta reunión, escucharla en el idioma español. Por favor, tiene que ir en la barra de abajo de su pantalla y se va a activar el servicio de interpretación, que es uno de forma de globo, y con la palabra de interpretación usted da clic ahí, se le va a abrir una ventana y va a seleccionar el idioma español. Si usted está conectado desde un teléfono, tiene que ir a la opción de más, son los 3 puntitos, tiene que abrir la ventana, se le va a aparecer una ventana y tiene que seleccionar servicio de interpretación español y ya puede escuchar esta reunión en el idioma español. A continuación, Sara va a dar las instrucciones en el idioma mandarín. Gracias.
Thank you very much, Miguel. And Sarah, I understand you're our interpreter this evening for Mandarin. I do see something in the chat that individuals are having a hard time seeing the language for Mandarin. If I can get a little tech support here, that might be helpful. Go ahead, Sarah.
Hi, everyone. Before I do my introduction, we haven't been assigned to the interpreter yet. So,
that's part of the challenge.
So while you're doing that, I'm going to do my introduction.
Perfect. Okay. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Sarah. I'm the Mandarin interpreter tonight. 大家晚上好，我是今天各位的中文传译员莎拉。如果您需要普通话的传译服务，可以点击屏幕右下方的地球图标，选择 Chinese 中文或普通话。如果您是用手机登录，可以点击右上方3个点的图标，选择语言服务，再点击中文、普通话。谢谢大家。Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I believe we've now started those realms, yes. So that globe should appear and people can select that. Thank you, Sarah. Okay, I think we have one more slide of some preliminaries. If we can go to the next slide, please. So we have tech support this evening. If you should need help with Zoom or the features of the meeting, please do use the chat function and you should be able to chat tech support. In addition, you will see that one person is labeled, one of our staff people has labeled themselves ask questions here. That helps us manage the chat and not have everybody chatting to each individual participant, which can get confusing, and we want to make sure we answer any questions. So if you have a question about the substance of the meeting tonight, you can send those to ask questions here, and then also have the tech support. I think we can go to the next slide. And our last matter for introductory material, we do have closed captioning available you can click the closed caption button at the bottom of your screen, and you're able to click and drag those captions in order to better see the presentation if that is to your liking. And we can go to the next slide, please. Okay, so I want to introduce the folks who are here tonight from the MBTA to talk about our regulations regarding fare evasion. As I said, my name is Lindsay Heffernan. I'm the Assistant General Manager for Policy and Transit Planning, and I'd welcome some of my colleagues to take a moment to turn their screen on and introduce themselves. You can go ahead, Rachel.
Good evening. I'm Rachel Morse, Director of Transit Policy for the MBTA.
Hi, I'm Sophia Bell Masterson. I'm the Deputy Director of All Door Boarding and Proof of Payment.
Hello, everyone. I'm Victoria Ireton, and I'm the Deputy Director of Community Engagement.
Awesome. Thank you all very much. And at this point in time, I'm going to turn the presentation over to Safira, who's going to present for about 15 or 20 minutes on this topic, and then we will be taking comments and questions at the end. So thank you very much. Safira, please go ahead.
Great, thanks, Lindsay. So very briefly, our agenda in terms of the presentation this evening, I'm going to give some background on why we're here tonight and what we're trying to achieve. Then we're going to detail what's in the proposed regulations in our draft, and then we're going to ask for your feedback on those. So first, to start off with a little bit of background, why do we need new regulations? Why are we sitting here tonight? So prior to January of 2021, fine levels for fare evasion were set by statute by the legislature. And it was $100 for your first offense, $200 for a second offense, and $600 for all the offenses thereafter. There was no warning, there was no reset period. And one unpaid citation was considered reportable to the RMV, which would mark your license for non-renewal. Excuse me. So at the MBTA's request, the law was amended in 2020 and it went into effect January of 2021 to reduce the range of possible fines from between $10 and $250, to remove the possibility of arrest for fare evasion, and importantly to this meeting, to require the MBTA to enact specific regulations setting exact fine levels, addressing what penalties would be in place for failure to pay fines, to create alternative methods of resolution and an appeals process. So the staff of the MBTA presented draft regulations to the FMCB for a vote in May of 2021, after going through a similar public engagement process to what we're doing now in spring of 2021. However, the FMCB didn't vote on regulations during its term, and its term expired in last summer. And as you probably all know, we have a new board in place. So we are preparing to seek a board vote soon to adopt regulations as required by the law that we requested. So you might be asking, why did the MBTA request this change in law such that we can set our own regulations? And why was that important to us at the time? And why are we moving forward with regulations now? So the T is in the process of adopting a new approach to fare compliance that we feel like is a more appropriate balance of both effectiveness of ensuring fare compliance, that people pay their proper fares, and also fairness to our riders, a non-punitive system. And new regulations are a key component of our updated approach. And so that's why we requested and were given this legislative authority in early 2021. So the challenge that we have now is that we're currently in a legal vacuum. We don't have any approved regulations as related to fare evasion. And so we don't have any tools to enforce our current fare policies. And that's why we're moving forward with a vote to remedy this issue and ensure that we have some regulation in place. I want to make very clear and pause here that the goal of regulations is not fine revenue from citations. It's to encourage fare compliance in a cost-effective manner without being punitive to our riders. So just want to put that out there up front. So in terms of the regulatory process, I know some of you are very familiar with this. For others of you, you may not be as familiar. And these regulations follow a slightly different process than some of the things that we do at the T that sort of begin and end relatively with board approval. So for these regulations, we actually interact quite a bit with the Secretary of State's office for the state. So we first filed the draft regulations with the Secretary of State's office. Then we collect public comment. So we've been doing that for the past 5.5 weeks. We opened our written comment period on May 13th, and it closes this evening right before midnight. So if you prefer to submit a written comment rather than make a public comment at this hearing, which will also be recorded and added to the record, you have until almost midnight tonight to do that. We will then review those public comments that we receive, and we'll amend our proposed draft regulations based on rider feedback. And in a minute, I'm going to highlight some of the ways in which we've already done that since our previous public feedback period. And then we will present the updated draft regulations to the board for their consideration and approval. And then once they ultimately are approved by the board, the final regulations are filed with the Secretary of State and they take effect after publication in the Massachusetts Register, which I'm guessing most of you don't read, but it's a publication from the Secretary of State's office. So that's sort of the formal process around enacting regulations. So before I get into what our current proposal looks like, I did want to address some prior rider feedback. We're in a somewhat unique situation in that we conducted a round of public engagement and feedback last spring, in addition prior to this round as well. And so we knew going into this round that we had some prior feedback. And so we did look at that as we were crafting our proposal, which is different than the one that we proposed in 2021. So a few things that I want to note. The MBTA's original proposal in 2021 called for the provision of marking a driver's license for non-renewal should a person have unpaid fines related to fare evasion citations. So this was similar to the past practice, which the T has had in place that ability for a while. So we had kept that in there, but we heard very strongly from our riders that they had concerns about the ramifications of going forward with this. And so in this current draft of proposal, we are no longer proposing to mark licenses for non-renewal due to those unpaid citations. The second thing that we heard from folks is that a $50 fare evasion fine is better than a $100 fine, or up to $600 fine, but it's still too high, that it should be lower. We looked at this really carefully. We ran the numbers and did our analysis and determined that a $50 fine is still the best balance between reducing fine levels from what they were pre-2020 and also maintaining an effective incentive for fare compliance, which is an important part of these regulations. However, I do want to note, and I'll highlight these once we get into the proposal, that we've added a formal warning prior to any citation or fine, as well as a 3-year reset period for warnings and citations. And I'll explain that a little bit further in a moment when I explain the full proposal. The next thing that we heard from riders in public feedback was that the T should pursue low income or free fares. So this is something that we have analyzed proposals for operationalizing, especially the means tested fare, and should funding become available for a low income fares program, we'd be excited to move forward with operationalizing that.
Vera, can I ask you to just slow down a little bit for our interpreters?
Yes, I'm sorry, I have a bad habit of talking quickly. I'm going to take a drink of water. I'll give them a minute to catch up. So the last thing that we heard from riders is that the T should be aggressively controlling fare evasion and concerns about riders' own experiences witnessing fare evasion and how that made them feel like they were participating in a system that was unfair. However, we feel like our currently planned strategy will appropriately manage fare evasion without creating an unwelcoming environment for our riders or a punitive set of policies. So again, I think you've heard me say this a few times, balance is really what we're going for. And so we feel that our proposal does achieve that. All right, so getting into the meat of what's in the proposed regulations. There's a little bit of legalese here that I want to go through. And while some of you may think that this is a boring slide or it's obvious, I do want to make sure that we're all on the same page about the definitions in the proposed regulations so that we're all in the same playing fields as we discuss them. So when we say MBTA or the authority, those are all just ways of saying the Massachusetts Bay Transportation Authority, the MBTA, the T. Fare evasion means a failure or refusal to pay or prepay a required fare or the improper use of a reduced fare card on any vehicle or ferry owned or operated for the MBTA. A fare inspector is any person who's designated by the MBTA to verify that a passenger has paid the required fare and to issue non-criminal citations for failure to pay the required fare. And so importantly, this it's a wide definition in that this allows us to employ people who are not just police to be issuing fare evasion citations and to be ensuring fare compliance. So that's why we say fare inspector and not transit police or another term like that. This is a more inclusive term. So a fine is the amount between $10 and $250. If you guys remember, that's the sort of brackets, the limitations that were put on us in the new law, and that's assessed to a person for fare evasion related to a citation. a hearing officer. So you're going to hear me talk in a minute about the different means that you can appeal, and one of them is a live hearing, and that is conducted by a hearing officer, and that's the person that was designated by the T to hear appeals of non-criminal citations related to these regulations. A warning is a written warning. It's a formal written warning. It's not someone speaking to you. It's written down and it's recorded for a first offense of fare evasion within a 3-year period. And a non-criminal citation, it's a citation issued to a person who evades payment of a fare on any vehicle or ferry owned or operated for the MBTA. So I hope that makes sure that we're all on the same page about the language that we're using and what we're talking about when we say those terms. So grounds for a non-criminal citation for fare evasion, if that fare inspector or transit police officer sees someone either evading payment of their required fare or fraudulently misusing a reduced fare card, or if upon request a person fails or refuses to provide proof of having paid or prepaid the required fare for any vehicle or ferry owned or operated for the MBTA, the inspector or the TPD officer may issue such person a non-criminal citation. So that's the formal definition that we have in the regulations related to a non-criminal fare evasion citation.
Take another sip of water. Take another sip of water.
Can you go back a slide as well, please? I did not finish half of that slide. Thank you.
All right, I apologize. I spent 3 years in system-wide accessibility, and you'd think I would have figured out my cadence for our ASL interpreters. So I do apologize, Shannon. I know I'm running you through the ringer tonight. All right, so now into the meat of probably what you guys are interested in hearing about tonight, which actually is our proposal related to fare evasion regulations. So what's actually inside of it? So on fine levels, I want to distinguish that we are moving to 2 different types of fines for fare evasion. There's your regular vanilla fare evasion, you board a bus without paying, you hop over a turnstile. So this fare evasion citation, we're proposing that we cut that to a level that's more than half of previous levels. There's a formal written warning prior to any citation. And then your first, second, and third citations are $50. And your fourth and subsequent citation would be a $100 fine. And that is all within a 3-year reset period. And that 3-year reset period is unique to each individual. So it rolls from the date of your warnings and citations. It's not on a calendar year, it's a rolling 3-year period. So if, for example, you receive a warning in 2022, then you receive your first citation in 2022, and then you have no interactions, no citations. And then in 2026, we find that you fare evaded again. In that case, you're going to go back to a formal written warning. So the second category of fare evasion citations is fraudulent misuse of a reduced fare credential. And that's a separate citation. And what that means is that you're using a reduced fare card that doesn't belong to you. So for example, if I were to use my mom's senior card, that would be fraudulent use of a reduced fare credential. So the setup here really mirrors the top one in that there's a written warning prior to a citation. After that, you move to citations, the first 3 of which carry a fine of $75. And then after that, the fourth and subsequent within that 3-year period is $150. Again, there's a 3-year reset period. And for those of you who are not viewing the slide, there's several things here that I wanted to note that are updated from the regulations that we proposed to the FMCB last spring. And so notably, that's a formal written warning prior to either of these citations and the 3-year reset period for both of these types of citations. So very briefly, I want to note that, of course, we look to peer agencies for models and to determine how we want to move forward on certain items. And we have plenty of conversations with them related to various strategies, fairs, et cetera. And this was no exception. So we talked to a lot of peer agencies about how they approach this. And so this slide highlights the varying citation amounts at different transit agencies across the country, from King County Metro, which has the lowest that we could find at $50, to the CTA in Chicago, which had the highest that we could find at $300 for your first citation. And there's a variety in between there, but we feel that our $50 citation level puts us sort of at the healthy part of this range. And so that is what we're looking at when we examine peer agency excuse me, fare evasion citation amounts. So moving on to appeals, a person has 30 days to either pay the fine that they were given or to appeal the fine. And there's two different means of appeals. You can either submit a written appeal or you can request a hearing. So requests will be taken by mail or electronic means. So there will be an online option for those of you who would prefer that, where you can submit a written appeal, attach documents, etc. You can pay a fine online, you can request a hearing online and actually look at the slots available to do so, or you can make those requests by mail. You'll also be able to call our team to be able to make those requests if phone is your preference for scheduling. The T then has 60 days to respond to appeals, and we'll give you an explanation if we're denying your appeal. And if a written appeal is denied, then you can go ahead and request a hearing. Hearings are going to be informal. You're not meeting with an MBTA lawyer, and they may be in person or they may be virtual, as you can imagine in this day and age. That's key. The decision of the hearing officer. So if you go through the written appeal, then you do the hearing. That decision of the hearing officer is final, but it is subject to judicial review. And then in terms of the ways, the responses you may get from the T may fully grant, we may deny, or we can partially grant an appeal. We're creating adjudication procedures for how we will rule on appeals. And the options for partially granted appeals, for those of you who are wondering, will include lowering the fine level and or providing additional time to pay the fine. All right, so again, to provide some frame of reference of where we fall compared to peer agencies, this slide shows a chart of days to appeal citations at peer agencies. So King County Metro is up there at the highest number of days to appeal. They give you 90 days to appeal or pay. The lowest is LA Metro and San Francisco Muni at 21 days to appeal or pay. Finally, I just want to say that a piece of our regulations are around an annual citation report, which is something that the T has not previously published, but that moving forward, we must issue an annual report. And this will include data on the number of warnings and citations that were issued in the prior 12 months. And we're working with the Office of Performance Management and Innovation, some of you know them as OPMI, to develop contents for that report. OPMI are metrics and data gurus. So they're helping us figure out what we can report on and the way to organize that in such a way that's sensible and would make sense to the average person who was curious about our numbers related to warnings and citations in the past year. All right, so that concludes my presentation portion. I believe it's turning back to you, Lindsay.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you everybody again for bearing with us. And if some pieces went fast, we can always go back. So at this point, we are moving to different ways for people to make public comment. You can do so, and all public comments are the same. People can leave comments in the chat. If you have a question, we'll also try to address those. Again, please send them to the chat question, ask questions here. Then you can raise your hand. I'll go through that in just a minute and give us a comment, but we're also accepting written comments. And if you prefer to send us an email, the email address is on your screen through tonight. And as Safira mentioned, we'll take all of those comments, put them together for our board to know what our proposed regulations are, maybe make any changes that come out of all of those public comments, and all of that will be shared. You can go to the next slide, please. Awesome. Okay, so moving into how to make a comment tonight. We are, to make a comment, you're gonna need to raise your hand. And you're gonna do this virtually. To do this on a computer, you're gonna press Alt and then Y, or click the raised hand button under the Participants tab at the bottom. It should be at the bottom center of your screen. If you are on a mobile device, you're going to tap the raise hand button at the bottom center of your screen. And on a phone, you're going to dial *9. Once you raise your hand, you'll be added to a queue with others who have raised their hands. And I will call on folks on a first come, first served basis. When it's your turn to speak, I will say your last name or the last 4 digits of your phone number if you've called in, and let you know that I am unmuting you. If you are on a computer or mobile device, a box will pop up in the center of your screen, and you will need to confirm that you want to be unmuted before you begin speaking. If you're on a phone, an automated recording will let you know that you are unmuted, and you may speak as soon as that recording finishes. Once you're unmuted, everyone in the meeting can hear you. Before making your comment, I'd ask if you could please state your name and any organizational affiliation that you may have. Please limit all comments to no more than 2 minutes. We ask that you make 1 comment at a time so we can ensure that everyone gets a chance to speak. If you have additional comments, feel free to raise your hand again, and we'll try to make sure everyone gets to get all of their thoughts in for us. As soon as you are finished, you will be muted again. So just as a reminder, you can also post your comments in the chat, send them to ask questions here, and that'll also be part of our formal record. So 1 second, let me move around my screen a little bit so I can see you all. And it looks like we have a couple questions that have already come in from the chat, and I also see a raised hand. Last name Baxter, I am unmuting you.
Okay, yeah. Okay.
We can hear you. Perfect.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I want to congratulate you on this first for listening to all the comments we made before and having it much fairer. And the question I have is, when you do the data collection on the citations, are you going to show it by race and area that are given in so you can measure the equity on it?
Yep. Thank you very much for your comment. I'll do my best to take that one. So we will certainly be able to know exactly every location and date and time of us that a citation is issued in our future system, Ms. Baxter, and we will do our best to collect race and ethnicity information. Is a complicated one, as for anyone who's been following issues in law enforcement, this is also complicated. We don't really want to be asking people's race and ethnicity in the middle of a crowded bus, but it is also very important for us to be tracking that issue, and we will be reporting out. We haven't figured out the best ways to do that in the future system, but it is a commitment of ours that it be part of, however we collect that data, that it be part of the public report. Did you have a follow-up?
No, I was just going to congratulate you on everything else. You listened to us and you made good changes.
I appreciate that. Thank you very much. It's always a pleasure to have you here. Okay, I have a couple of comments in the, I'm just going to lower your hand then, Ms. Baxter, and I have a couple comments in the that we've gotten through the chat, and so I'll try to address some of those. Someone asked, it looks like last name Lord, I'd like to know if there are any provisions for what would happen to someone who is unable to pay the $50 fine for fare evasion. And so as we had on our slides and is in our regulations right now, that we have the flexibility to work with riders through the appeal process to ensure that they have other ways to pay and or extend time. And so we are, as Safira mentioned, we are trying to not create a punitive system, but just one in which people pay their fair share. So that is our plan going forward. I would also note a next question came through from I think the same person. Can the past practice of non-renewal be explained? I think this was referring to marking people's licenses. It makes no sense and is so deeply punitive. This sounds celebratory, but it's just that it's been removed, but it was just cruel that it was ever included. And I guess I would note that the marking of licenses for non-renewal is part of the state statute that was just updated with our last transportation bond bill in January of 2021. And so that's a practice that the state sort of gave the MBTA the authority to do that. So it's in the statute, but we are electing not to use that as a current collection method, in part because of some of the similar concerns as I think the commenter has. Let's see, I see another one. Oh, I'm sorry, there's a hand raised. How about last name Hipple? You should be able to unmute.
Thank you. Hi.
Hi.
I have a few quick comments, so maybe I'll try to keep them super brief. But Ali Heipel, I'm with the Conservation Law Foundation. And first I wanted to say, echoing Louise Baxter's comment, thank you. These are great changes that we're really happy to see. So really appreciate your work on that. A couple things specifically related to the last comment that you just read around the non-renewal. We noticed that we really appreciate the language being removed in the proposed regulations, and just would recommend perhaps being explicit in the regulations that the T will not pursue that as a penalty, since that language is still in the statute, as you noted. And then quickly also, I think another comment that was read out in the chat around the alternate methods for paying a fine, we would also just recommend, we would love to see perhaps some examples in the regulations around what those alternate methods might be, whether it's community service or some other sort of approach like that. So just including some recommendations there would be really helpful. And then finally, just wanted to, we're really glad to see the lowered levels for the penalties, but would urge consideration of even going all the way down to that lowest level that is noted in the transportation bond bill of $10 for the penalties. So would appreciate all the work that's gone into this, and really thank you for the opportunity to comment.
Thank you, Ali. I'm sorry I mispronounced your last name. I appreciate some of those comments, and it has been a really great partnership working with CLF on a lot of these issues. This has been my first days at the T 3 years ago. This was in early thinking, and I will note for your first two, I've made note, and we'll kind of loop back on those about other potential things you'd like to see in the regs. I will say, the lowest fine level is lower than even our commuter rail fares, and so on a bunch of our zones. So that does present some financial challenges for us to have a citation that is less than paying your fare. We don't want to inadvertently disincentivize paying of fares. So that is part of the other side of this. Some of you may remember when the FMCB was considering this. Back a little over a year ago, we were dancing around the idea of different citations by mode. So we have considered that and looked at it. So if a bus fare is a lot lower than a commuter rail fare, should the citation amounts be different? We've decided not to go forward with that at this point in time, given some of the complexity in operationalizing that, but it is still something we are considering and looking at, and can always come back and make new proposed regulations. So that was the intent when asking the legislature for the authority to do this. Okay, I see another raised hand, and then I'll get back to questions in the chat. And last name Foss, I'm unmuting you, sir. Oh, there you go.
Hi, my name's Evan Foss. I live in Newton. I work in Boston. If the goal is not to produce revenue via the fare, why not simply have the fare evasion fine? Sorry, if the goal is to not have the fine be to producing revenue, why not tie the evasion fine to the other transportation fine that we have that's not intended to prevent people from use, which is jaywalking. The jaywalking fine in the state of Massachusetts is $1 for the first offense. And then it goes up by a dollar after the third offense, and it's capped at $5. Now, I figure you just add that fine to the standard fare for whatever mode somebody's on, and that should be the fine that they're charged. I realize this puts you below the $10, but I think it makes a lot more sense because that way you're at least tied to something else that people shouldn't be not making use of. I do appreciate the work that's gone into it, although I find it frankly very frustrating as the FMCB did vote for the means tested fare repeatedly, and I find it rather appalling that the current board decided to waive themselves of that push. I also feel that the fares should themselves be slashed in accordance with the reduced service we are now experiencing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Faust. We will certainly take a look at what the jaywalking statute puts out there as a possibility. We don't have the authority to go below 10, but I understand your intent completely. Thank you for your comment, sir. And okay, so let's see. I have a comment in the chat coming from the last name Lou. In what ways will enforcement be introduced to catch or sign off citations to people evading fares, in particular the Green Line and buses, which I believe is where most fare evasion happens? And so right now we are trying to fill a regulatory hole in that in getting some regulations passed. I think what your question is really leaning towards, I believe it's Mr. Liu, is that how will we operationalize this? And over the course of the move to modernize our fare collection system, particularly on bus and Green Line, where opening all the doors does introduce the risk of higher fare evasion rates. That's when in the future, the MBTA, through these regulations, could decide that somebody, a civilian, a non-police officer employed by the MBTA, could go onto those buses and ensure that people have paid their fares and then be able to issue a citation. So I hope that is helpful. Give me 1 second. I'm just looking through the chat. I do see somebody asked a question about somewhat unrelated, but how much is the fare for an M7 T-Pass, which is one of our student programs. I'd welcome one of my colleagues to drop into the chat function a link to that program so we can help get an answer to this person's question. And I see another hand raised. So Ms. Davis, I am gonna unmute you.
I'm just a little curious. Isn't fare evasion, it's a little bit hard because the reason why they're evading fare most likely is they can't afford the fare in the first place. So, doesn't it make it a little bit more insane to try to make them pay or something? Is there something alternatively that they can do, like community service or something, if they're unable to pay?
Yeah, I think a couple of things. I note a couple comments we've already had about a low-income fare being potentially an important long-term investment for the MBTA. If somebody can't afford their fare, that we have a way for them to pay a reasonable fare. We do, however, know that fare evasion does happen across the economic spectrum. Higher income people don't pay their fares, and some lower income people don't pay their fares. And so it is not merely a matter of just economics. Many people point to our commuter rail as an example of feeling that some people are avoiding paying there. So I think it's a little more complicated, but by having an appeal process where we can have a conversation with the writer if they've received a citation and putting in a warning before anyone gets one, we hope that we're helping to mitigate some of the challenges that lower income individuals may face on the MBTA. Thank you, Ms. Davis, for your comment. Okay. Another comment we have in the chat from the last name Lord. When the language says prepaid, how does this apply to the commuter rail? I was under the belief that you would pay for your ticket on board with a conductor, especially because there's no pay station at my hometown commuter rail station. I was scolded by a fare inspector for not prepaying when I got on at South Station, despite the fact that I've been able to pay on board without issue for my entire life. I'd really like to understand this better. I think there are a couple things going on here. First and foremost, I'd say you can still pay with cash on board a commuter rail train as of today. In the future system, we'll be trying to move cash off of a lot of our systems to make them more efficient and to have our operations folks not be dealing with cash, and hopefully move everyone more quickly through the system. In the future, the intent is that people should have reloaded, and again, not today, in the future, that people should have reloaded online, either via phone or at a fare vending machine or a retailer before boarding. We do want to encourage everyone to purchase their commuter rail product in advance to help speed up service, but we understand that isn't always possible, and we are working very hard to make that easier in the future to be able to do so. And addressing fare vending machines and ability to pay at every location is one component of that. So I thank you very much for your comment. Okay. Sorry, folks, I'm getting some comments to me in the chat and I just don't want to miss them. I want my team to not lose them. Bear with me 1 minute. Okay. So another, I don't see any other raised hands. Again, just remind people that they can click that button if they'd like to. And then, okay. All right, I see last name, I think of Cronin, said, in the decades of riding the T, I have never seen any fare evaders stopped by anyone on the T. When I ask staff, like the people in red shirts and hats, they say that they don't. Also, the MBTA people in police uniforms, they say they don't either. So who does address the fare evaders? Also, are you familiar with the LA system whose gates open after one has paid the fare and immediately closes, no one else can enter? And then a third comment, as all part of one, is there a particular system that stands out as having the most fare evaders? Bus, commuter rail, the subway, or ferry? There's a lot in that comment. So part of one of the reasons we need these regulations is because the change in the transportation bond bill of 2021 gave the MBTA the authority to have individuals other than the transit police be able to issue citations, but we need regulations to just say exactly who. And that's part of why Sphere had a definitions page, so we could let civilians in the future and MBTA staff, and we'll decide which groups of MBTA staff. The red shirts or transit ambassadors definitely cannot issue fare evasion citations. We don't want those individuals. They haven't been trained to do it. And we certainly want to bear in mind the safety of everybody involved, and are not looking to ask them to take on that responsibility at this time. Fare gates, to that piece, our gates and related technology are designed to balance safety and fare collection. We certainly don't want to accidentally close gate doors on an individual trying to enter the system, but it is something we are considering when we're figuring out how long gates should stay open after a tap. And I would note we are in the process of putting gates in at some of the terminus stations for commuter rail in order to help close what we see as a loophole in that system. And so some of those will be moving in and going live pretty soon. Okay. And last name Power. I would welcome you to unmute. Glad you're here.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Maria Orlan Power, and I'm with Green Roots in Chelsea and East Boston. I really appreciate the work that has gone into developing these. I will say we still have several pretty serious concerns around policing, really policing poverty and policing folks that think you're right. There are probably some folks who can afford it who don't, who do fare evasion. But our real concern is the folks that are the most vulnerable, low-income riders, people of color. And, you know, we've seen how police departments across the country have tried to implement anti-bias programs. And it's been, for the most part, I would say, unsuccessful. We're still seeing police brutality and biased enforcement across the country. So I don't know why we would think this is going to be different. We in Chelsea and East Boston are extremely concerned about profiling poor people and people of color. You know, our residents our median income is around $30,000, which is half of the area median income. So just extremely concerned about the impact that this will have on low income riders. And I think that this is even more stark in the context of not having a low income fare. And so if there was a low income fare and we were moving this policy sort of alongside, I think it would be less concerning. But the fact that we're moving this ahead and that we're not moving the low income fare ahead at the same pace, I think is extremely concerning. We really should be investing in the T, not in programs like fare evasion policy. And we are also signing on to some comments along with the Conservation Law Foundation. So they'll be submitting written comments by the end of today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's nice to have you here. And I certainly appreciate a lot of those concerns. I think we are, as a staff, trying to do our best to ensure that we address a lot of them, but I hear them completely. And I recognize particularly how do we think through enforcement in the future. And I have no doubt we will continue to work with you on all of those. But note that the desires for a low income fare to be a part of the overall way that we think about fares will certainly be as well shared with our directors. Okay, I think I have, we have another raised hand. I'm gonna unmute last name Lord, please.
Hi, this is my final question, so bear with me. But I use the JFK UMass stop regularly, and I've seen, I think 2 or 3 times middle schoolers from the middle school down the street getting yelled at and like chased down the stairs by the MBTA, I don't know, the people in red shirts. And I just think that I understand the need to be able to fund the T. But I just want to know if there's a possibility to have a provision in the bill to do it with respect and not in a malicious or, rude way, especially when it's minors or people who just simply can't pay it. When I don't know anyone who evades the fare when they don't need to, so.
No, thank you very much. We should probably look into that a little bit more. I would say that through a partnership with Boston Public Schools, all students should have access to MBTA passes. And so I can't speculate exactly what was happening with the transit ambassadors in that station, Ms. Lord, but certainly it shouldn't be a fair issue, unless the students lost their card, in which case our staff have been told to be very generous when we think about Boston Public School students. That is certainly the intent of the agreement we have between the city and the MBTA. But thank you for bringing that to our attention. We have another comment that we have in the chat, one other comment I forgot to make. This is from Ali from Conservation Law Foundation, is that an even longer period to pay the fine or appeal the fine would be super helpful. As you noted, many peer agencies have a timeline of longer than the proposed 30 days. A longer response period would go a long way toward easing the burden of navigating the process of either paying or appealing. I really appreciate that. It's something we're actively considering, whether a longer pay or appeal period is something we should be looking at, and we'll definitely take that comment under advisement. So thank you for raising it.
Lindsay?
Yes.
Do you mind if we just pause real quick to check for the other channels?
Yes, check the rooms. Who's it? If any comments?
All right, I'll be right back.
Okay. For those following along from home, we're popping into each of the language interpretation rooms to
Sarah,
see if
you
there's
have
questions.
no questions in your room, correct? Sarah, can you hear me? Okay, just want to check. Miguel, do you have any questions in your room? Okay, thank you so much. Thanks, Lindsay.
No, thank you for keeping me honest there. I appreciate it. I do know we had one comment about having a gate close. Someone said I had a gate close on me at an MBTA station once while I was exiting. We have I'm forgetting what we call it, sort of a testing room where we're testing our future technology and the concerns about ensuring that individuals with disabilities can get through the gates. And there's lots of effort there. So I hope that it's on our path of things that we'll be updating soon. But thank you for sharing the challenges you had at MGH. I am going to pause and ask my colleagues if I've missed any questions. I don't see any more, and I don't see any raised hands. It's almost like you all wanted this meeting to end by 7. We have a couple more minutes here, though, so I'm happy to stay for a few more minutes in case somebody wants to ask a question. But I think if we can go to the next slide.
Lindsay, I think there's one more
is there?
question in the chat. If you just look up, I think it's from Glenn Berkowitz.
Oh, excuse me. Thank you. I didn't address that one. Okay. Thanks, Victoria. Need people here to keep me honest. Thanks for having this discussion tonight. Much appreciated. 2 questions. Under the fare inspector definition, I get why the MBTA would want to write it so broadly. But if the person would not be a police officer or wearing that kind of formal attire, how do you expect riders to know with assurance that the person asking for proof of payment is asking that in a legitimate way? It would seem that such a fare inspectors are currently defined, leaves itself open to many potential problems for riders and any such inspectors. Safira, I might come back to you about some early thinking we have about attire for folks, so stay tuned, but there's a second part to this. The second question, the slide on citation levels shows 2 different buckets for fines. What are the reasons we would not simply create one bucket with one potential set of dollar penalties instead of 2? And so I'll take that one first, a little out of order, Mr. Berkowitz, but the 2 different buckets for fare evasion are one, sort of our traditional fare evasion. You didn't tap, you didn't pay, you jumped over a fare gate, something of that sort. The second bucket is if you fraudulently misuse somebody's reduced fare card. So we have people who go through the effort to enroll in Senior Pass or Youth Pass or Blind Access Pass or TAP, which is for individuals with disabilities. And if somebody were to use one of their cards and not be such a person, right? If I had one of those cards as a senior, Lindsay Heffernan, and somebody who was not a senior took my card and went and used it, we see that as that fraudulent use as being different. And therefore we have a different citation scheme sort of for that kind of behavior. That's our thinking there. Safira, are you here? Do you want to say anything about our early thoughts? We're a little ways away from this, but thinking about inspectors and how people would know that inspectors are inspectors.
Sure, yeah. So first off, these folks will definitely be uniformed. We're not looking at having, like, I think when folks hear civilian, sometimes they associate that with a policy like this, like a civilian, like a police officer in plain clothes. That's not what we're looking at. We're not trying to hide who these folks are. So they will be in uniforms, probably quite similar to what you see our other frontline MBTA employees in, such as a motor person, bus operator, or inspector. So we do tend to have a standard, right? Those navy blue pants and a white or a light blue shirt. So we haven't yet figured out what the uniform is, and that's part of a discussion that we'll have with whatever labor union these folks are likely seated within, but it will be a formal T uniform such that you'll know that they're a T employee and not just some random person coming up to you asking whether or not you've paid. So I hope that answers the question.
Thanks, Safira. Okay, I think we have addressed all of the comments or questions that we have received this evening. So you can see an email address on your screen, I hope. That's publicengagement@mbta.com. We're happy to take people's comments and questions. Formal comments as part of this public hearing are due by midnight tonight or 11:59, please. We anticipate going back before the board in the coming months on this topic. And I really want to thank you all for spending an hour of your life with us at the T. We do appreciate it. I will stay here and ask some of the T staff to stay here in case anybody is looking for the room to get smaller to ask any questions. But otherwise, I would thank you all for being with us and say goodnight.